Well, hello everyone. I think I'm live now and I'm running late, so I apologize for that. Good evening, happy Sunday, and we'll just see if some folks come on here. I don't see anyone yet. Oh, there's someone. Thank you. Hello. Welcome to Syria Face to Face, episode 12. And as I always say, a lot of this came together at the last minute, and I realized as I was doing my notes that there's no way to get through what I want to get through tonight in one segment. So we're just going to take our time on this, and hopefully it will make sense. My name is Janice Courtcamp, and tonight we're talking about Israel's role in the conflicts in the Middle East that are going on right now, and particularly, the ones that have been going on since 9/11. And as I was, wow, hello, it's wonderful to see everyone. Thank you. I got back from my mom's and she's doing well. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who sent her your greetings and best wishes. I went through them with her and she was deeply touched. And that meant a lot to me and to her. So thank you very much. I'm just going to catch my breath here and then we'll get into it. So we're talking about Israel's role in the conflicts of the Middle East. And I realized, I wanted to do a timeline and go through step by step of the resources and everything that I have. And I might have to do that next week because it's so important to build a foundation for this discussion. And I'm really hoping that people who have little exposure to the things that I'm talking about will take the time to listen to these. And so I'm trying to build a case, and that requires laying a foundation. So for those of you who are on, who know all of this stuff, I apologize. But again, as activists, we're trying to wake up other people, and so we kind of have to start from ground zero. The last episode, episode 11, dealt with some basic myths and false narratives that have been shoved down our throat, so to speak, regarding Israel to gain support for that foreign entity's plans, both in Palestine and the region. And we're going to build more on that tonight, because if you understand that, the details will make much more sense. I wanted to start with an illustration of how these narratives and lies and false facts really have been shoved down the throats of Americans. There's this delicacy, particularly in France, called foie gras, and it's goose liver pate. And in order to make goose liver pate, foie gras, the geese are literally force-fed. There are tubes that are pushed down their throats, and they're fed and fed and fed until their livers become literally 10 times normal size. And then the birds are killed and the liver is harvested. I don't eat foie gras, but that to me illustrates the way that these false narratives have been shoved down the throats, particularly, I think, in America, but also in Europe and other Western countries, in order to get people's a sympathy for Israel and to get support for Israel. And as I said last week, once you see this and learn about these false narratives and how we've been manipulated, everything that is going on in the Middle East just makes a lot more sense. So we're going to continue along that path for tonight. One of the basic myths about the Middle East that has been force-fed us over the past 70 years, but particularly since 9/11, is that the Arabs have always fought each other. The people in the Middle East have always fought each other. And to that I say bullocks. I get this again and again and again as I am debating online or trying to wake people up, this is some kind of mantra that's repeated again and again by people who simply refuse to look at reality. And that reality is that if you study European history at all, if you study the history of the United States at all, let's look at Europe to start. Europe has been at war forever with each other, fighting each other, killing each other in wars of conquest and succession, wars of religions, and that's not even including the wars that have been fought around the globe for colonial powers to create colonies, to steal natural resources of other countries and take control of other countries. I mean, we are talking, in addition to 2 world wars that killed tens and tens and tens of millions of people, Europe has created massive death and destruction around the globe through their colonies. The United States as well. The U.S. has been at war for 220 approximately of the last 240 years. And, everything from slaughtering the buffalo to kill off the plains tribes to the current wars for natural resources and, geopolitical power and influence, and on behalf of foreign countries, actually, like many of our wars for Israel, for example. So to talk about the Middle East as this singular conflict zone that's just always been a problem and always been at war with one another, that's historical nonsense. Yes, there have been wars there. Yes, there have been other atrocities and all committed there. But compared to other areas, even China, for example, this is par for the course of humanity. And, at least the Middle East countries aren't going all over the globe creating death and destruction thousands of miles away from their homelands. So let's stop the hypocrisy and get real. And we're going to get real tonight. Some of the things that I'll be sharing are hard truths. They might be very uncomfortable truths for some people to hear. Some people might just be hearing them for the very first time. And I'll do it as gently and as diplomatically as I can. But we're going to get through it and share some of these things, because time is urgent and the situation is dire. Right now, there's war with Iran looming, and people are trying to get the U.S. to go to war against Iran. There have been wars and wars and wars. At least 1 million people have died now in Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc. And I think the body count is probably more like 2 million. Whole countries have been laid waste, and, there's no end in sight. So in order for there to be an end in sight, just like any disease, you can't just treat the symptoms. You actually have to look at the cause of the disease. I'm going to talk a lot. We're going to talk a lot about Israel's basic goals in the region, and why this is so important to understand these conflicts going on right now. Since the 1990s, mid-1990s, in particular, Israel has really come into kind of a full blossoming of the initially declared goals of the Zionists who created the Israel Project. And with the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu starting in the mid-1990s with the Likud party, the right-wing party, we have come to see some even, some very strong radicalized forces coming to bear on the region. As I said last week, I have become convinced that Israel is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And as we talk about their main goals, I think that you'll understand why I would say that. Because what is happening, in my opinion, is that the basic core of the conflicts, especially going on right now, but since Israel was created, is that you have some leaders and countries in the region that fully recognize that the Zionists are the wolves, and they understand their goals. And these people of the region that understand this are fighting against it and resisting it, and will refuse to submit to Israel's goals for their region. On the other side, you have Israel, of course, and you have its colonial sponsors of the UK. You have its modern bodyguard thug that is the United States of America. You have other colonial powers like France that have their own ambitions in the region. And there are regional powers that are on that side as well. So you have this whole group of countries and governments that are backing Israel both for their own greed and lust for power, and then you have the countries that are resisting it. What Israel wants in the region is to expand. And this does not mean just taking over land, which they've done in Palestine, of course, over the decades. It doesn't mean just stealing other people's land like Syria's Golan. It means expanding via influence and power throughout the region. And this is the heart of what's called the Greater Israel Plan. This is something that has been talked about by Israel's leaders and the Zionists who created Israel and have led Israel throughout the years, starting with its founder. The Greater Israel Project is basically that the Middle East would become, most of the Middle East would become basically proxies of the Zionists. Slave states, if you will, of the Zionists. And again, you have these leaders in the region like Hafez al-Assad in the early day, throughout his time, Nasser of Egypt and others who have understood this. The leadership in Iran understands this. So you have that group of resistors, and as well as the Palestinians, of course, that have been resisting what's been done to them and on their land. And you have the aggressors led by Israel and the other Western nations and regional powers that support them. The unifying factor that we're going to dig into a little bit in some depth tonight is greed. People think, people who don't understand the situation or who don't understand the history think that it's religious problems and, Israel needing to defend itself or what have you. But what's really gone on is you have a small group of people who, above everything and anything, want wealth and power, and they're working together to get it. So you have this Greater Israel Project plan of many of the Zionists, the leaders and the founders, but you also have an updated version of that based on the goal of Israel to become not only energy independent, but energy exporting. And they want to be a major player in the energy exporting global market. And to do this, one of the things that, Israel was not finding much in the way of natural resources on the land that it had originally been allocated. But there have been some discoveries lately. In 2009, for example, the massive Leviathan gas field off the coast of Israel, some of it is off the coast of Gaza, kind of changed the picture quite a bit. In addition, there's the discovery of oil in the Golan, which is added to the urgency by the Zionists to take full control of that land. So you have the need and the desire to take over control of the region through influence and power. And you also have a desire to be an energy exporter and to be, one of the major global powers in the world. To do this requires that any country or government or army that stands in its way to be destroyed. And this is the core, again, going back to the core of what's going on in the Middle East, is this requirement that strong armies that resist Israel and its expansionist goals be destroyed. Now, Saudi Arabia, of course, is controlled by the US and UK. It's been that way since the Saudi royals were designated, as royals, as the kings of Saudi Arabia. That's not the name of the country. That was put on there to cement and solidify a single family rule over that country, an absolute dictatorship over that country. And that was done in exchange for, oil rights and the vast incomes from that. Another factor that we have to talk about tonight is, and this is where it gets tough because people don't want to hear this, but there are Jews, there are the Zionists, there are radicalized Zionists who truly do believe that non-Jews are not human. And, this is not unique to certain Jews who believe this. This idea has been throughout time of certain people, certain races, thinking that they are superior to other races and that other races are not human. But this is actually true of modern day Zionists. Many of them are so radicalized and so extremist and brainwashed that they truly do believe that non-Jews are non-humans. And so you have a mentality that basically if an Arab or Iranian or a Yazidi or any of the numerous ethnicities in the region are killed, it's no more disturbing than if you kill a cockroach in your kitchen. And this mentality, it takes a form of arrogance and hubris that so grossly exceeds pride as to be its own psychosis. And you have that mentality in some of these Zionists and some of these Jews that are in Israel and supporting Israel that really adds a very disturbing and horrific dimension to all of these conflicts. These are teachings primarily out of the Talmud, and very few people, simple-minded Americans are unaware of what the Talmud is. And this is it's a series of books. It's as large as an encyclopedia of various teachings and proclamations, if you will, by various rabbis throughout the generations. And in the Talmud are a lot of things just talking about legal issues and, traditions and that sort of thing, but and kind of debates on certain questions is the biggest part of it. But there are some horrifically disturbing passages in the Talmud that support this idea of non-Jews being non-humans. And as I've researched many of the rabbis who are Talmudic and the leaders, they do not know the Torah at all, which is what is forms the Old Testament of the Bible, for example. Those are the sacred writings of the Jews. They're not familiar with those at all. They know only the Talmud and these really despicable teachings that are contained in parts of the Talmud. And so you have to kind of come to grips with this idea that as you're talking to some of these Zionists, they are looking at you really as, not a human being and beneath their contempt and their concern. So we need to educate people on this. This is not true of all Jews, of course. There are many Jews that are vehemently opposed to these teachings. There's a group called True Torah Jews with many excellent rabbis who talk about this. There are, whether they're secular and even atheist Jews, liberal Jews, or very devout Jewish believers, these teachings are abhorrent to them. But there is this core group that really does believe in this, that has a great deal of power both in Israel, but also in the pro-Israel lobbies, whether they're in the US or Europe or Russia or where have you. And so we're fighting that mentality, and it's very, very difficult to fight that. So as I said, in order for Israel to achieve its goals in the region, the strong armies that are in opposition to it have to be destroyed. In order to make that happen, a series of strategies have been adopted. And one, of course, is the propaganda that we've been force-fed like the geese that are about to be killed for their livers. Another part is the power of the pro-Israel lobby, particularly in the U.S. The U.S. is key to all this because, well, Britain has a considerable amount of power and influence because of the banking region there within the UK, but the US has the army. We have the world's largest army. We have military bases all around the world, 900 approximately military installations around the world. We've got the brawn that Israel needs to accomplish its goal and to act as their club and their threat against these countries that are standing in resistance to it. One of Israel's strategies that we became aware of in the 1980s with the Oded Yinon plan of 1982 is the idea of dividing and conquering the countries in the region that were standing in opposition to its goals. So you have Iraq, Syria, especially, those two. And the plan was that those countries with their strong armies would get divided into smaller, weaker, and sectarian or religious-based states. This is a plan or a strategy, of course, that's been employed throughout time. In fact, I was just reading how the French tried to do the same thing in Syria when they were illegally occupying Syria and had actually succeeded in forming an Alawite land at one point. So this is an old strategy, and it's old because it works. And so Israel, one of the leaders of Israel called Oded Yinon, came up with this plan of splitting these nations apart into smaller states. And what that would do is a couple of things. One, of course, it would weaken those armies. But two, it virtually guarantees that those states would be at constant conflict with one another And that always provides opportunities for people to capitalize on the chaos. And so the idea was to create within those countries, so we're talking Syria and Iraq especially, the constant conflict, constant chaos, that would make it impossible for them to be any kind of strong resistance to Israel's plans of expansion. What happened recently, though, starting in the mid-1990s, and I mentioned this last week, and we'll go into a little more detail this week, is there's a group of advisors, of policymakers, of very important people in Washington that are referred to as neocons, meaning the new conservatives, because they originally identified themselves as liberals, and then they switched to the Conservative Party to gain more power and influence in the Republican Party. But these neocons, have no allegiance to a political party. Their allegiance is to Israel first, and to war, and to money and power. In the 1990s, a group of these neocons wrote what's called a clean break strategy for defending the realm. What's important to understand is this was after the assassination of a more liberal and person that was interested more in peace in Israel. After that assassination, the extreme right-wingers came to power under Bibi Netanyahu, and he's been in power. He was just reelected to his 5th term leading Israel. Netanyahu has a real issue with delegation. He's not only just the prime minister, but he's the current minister of defense and minister of foreign affairs and minister of health. I think there's a couple others in there. So this group of neocons wrote what became adopted by Bibi Netanyahu as the strategy for Israel. And there's a great article actually in Zero Hedge, and I'm pulling it up here as I speak, where Tyler Durden really goes into depth on this. And there's another article by Colonel Pat Lang, who was head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and head of operations in the Middle East for some time, basically saying the same things, called Drinking the Kool-Aid, which is a must-read, and I'll include it in the list of resources for these talks, which I'm working on getting to you. But the clean break, basically, as I said, was adopted by Bibi Netanyahu as the strategy for achieving Israel's goals in the region. And this strategy was primarily focused on destroying Iraq and Syria and Iran as well. But the reason that the document, let's see, how do I phrase this? What makes this so significant is that it basically was an official giving up entirely of anything resembling the possibility of wanting any peace between Israel and its neighbors. That it was basically a full-out confirmation that all Israel is interested in is there are either governments that will be for them and work with them, or governments that are against them, and governments that are against them must be destroyed. So this was the basis of that document. It's very similar, as I said, to the document of the neocons the year following from the Project for the New American Century, their manifesto for putting the U.S. on a similar footing. Basically, if there's a government that's for the U.S., they can do whatever they want to their people. They can have whatever system they want. We don't care if they're socialists, absolute dictatorships, if they're killing all their people, any political dissenters or religious dissenters, we don't care, as long as they work with us. If they work against us, they're called axis of evil, and they're targeted for destruction. And that's the basic bottom line of all this. So it started with Israel coming officially onto that footing, and then the U.S. neocons, which are these very powerful people in Washington that have been the architects of our foreign policy for decades. It's the same thing of putting, kind of the nonsense behind anyone pretending they want anything good, and all they want is the accumulation of wealth and power. Am I making any sense here? Okay, somebody said I'm so clear, so thank you, Marin, for that. In the clean break, what was interesting is, like I said, Iraq and Syria were targeted for takeovers and chaos and death and destruction and all of those things. But it actually made it very clear that Syria, not Iraq, was the primary target. And it was considered that the road to Damascus leads through Baghdad, which is, kind of circumventing Syria and basically coming at it from both sides. And so this is what we've seen. Iraq was taken out. It was almost destroyed. It's in chaos. The government is weak. The army is weak. It didn't turn out like they wanted it to, but at least they achieved their goals of separating Kurdistan and of, weakening Saddam Hussein's army. But the target has been Syria. And what people really don't understand is why Syria is such an important target for Israel. Excuse me. There's a couple of reasons. First, the Greater Israel Plan that I mentioned before, the takeover influence, dominating influence in the region. But this is where you really get into the nitty-gritty about the oil and gas and their importance in all of this. There are massive gas reserves off the Mediterranean coast. So this would be Syria, Lebanon, Israel. Those gas reserves, we're talking, everybody up till recently has been focused on oil as the leading export of the region. But in fact, Europe produces most of its electricity from natural gas. Russia has been the leading importer into Europe of natural gas. And everybody wants a share of that natural gas market, particularly, anybody who has natural gas wants to get into the markets in Europe. And this includes Iran and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Israel. Israel, of course, is, it's not cool to be in business with Israel if you're a regional power. They required good relations with Turkey, Cyprus, and Jordan in order for them to have the pipeline routes that they wanted. So Israel behind the scenes has been working with Turkey and Jordan and Cyprus to form alliances and partnerships. Now, how do I make this simple? Many people have talked about how the core reason, the basic reason for the U.S. manufactured war in Syria using terrorist proxies is because of these gas pipeline plans and deals, and that is a huge factor. So, oh gosh, where am I going with this? Israel, in addition to needing good relations with Turkey and Cyprus and Jordan to get these gas pipeline deals into Europe, they also had targeted Lebanon. Lebanon also has a huge area that has unreported or undiscovered, but is being researched, gas fields there. And Israel has always wanted to take over at least southern Lebanon for many reasons, because many of the Palestinians moved in there, and a lot of the strong resistance has come from there. The PLO was based out of there for some time. But they've always had their eye on taking control of Lebanon. Syria, being the next door neighbor, has prohibited that takeover. And so Syria has always stood in Israel's way of taking over Lebanon. The Syrian troops, of course, were there from 1976, I guess, to 2006. So they were there for decades. And they finally, they pulled out in 2006, or 2005, excuse me, and then Israel immediately invaded Lebanon yet again, and they were routed by Hezbollah and with the help of Syria and Iran. So what you have is Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran prohibiting Israel from accomplishing its goal of wanting to take over southern Lebanon. Because of that, Hezbollah is called this big terrorist organization, and they have to be completely dismantled and defeated and all of these things. But what Hezbollah does in Lebanon, their one goal is keeping Israel from taking over the place. And so Israel and its allies, so you're talking the US, UK, France, a lot of other European countries, designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization for having the nerve and the ability to keep Israel from taking over Lebanon. That's the basic reality of the situation. There's so many dimensions, it's really hard to just keep on a single track. So going back to a clean break, going back to the neocons that run U.S. foreign policy, going back to the Project for the New American Century, going back to the Oded-Yinon plan, everything has been working in the direction of destroying Syria. And this is what Colonel Pat Lang talked about in Drinking the Kool-Aid. Charles Glass, a very famous Middle Eastern journalist in the Middle East, in 2003 wrote an article called "Is Syria Next?" And it's a brilliant article, and he talks about this, that the ultimate goal for the immediate future has always been to destroy Syria. Now, if it was just Israel wanting to destroy Syria, there wouldn't be really that much of an issue, because Syria and Hezbollah have proven that in conventional warfare, it's very easy to defeat Israel's army. They're really quite their army is used to fighting kids throwing rocks and flaming kites and, housewives and mothers. They're not used to taking on an army. And 2006 proved that Hezbollah, with the help of Syria and Iran, easily and in a humiliating defeat for Israel, proved that what the Israeli leaders called, there's a new Arab in town, there's a new sheriff in town. How dare these Arabs actually defeat us in this humiliating way? And that goes back to the pictures that I used to announce this talk tonight and last time, of me at Melita, which is in southern Lebanon. And what that place is a memorial and a museum dedicated to this defeat of Israel's troops by Hezbollah, particularly with the help of Syria and Iran. And, this was a huge turning point in the region, because all of a sudden Israel was panicked, and they realized that the armies of these resisting nations could and would defeat them in conventional warfare. So they need the U.S. and the U.S. partners, NATO partners, to come to their aid and do their fighting for them. And we'd already done this in Iraq, and we were doing it now in Syria. They want us to do it in Iran. How that happens is the result of the incredible power of the pro-Israel lobby, particularly in the U.S. To go over some basics, of the entirety of the Jewish population of the world, 40% of the world's Jews live in America. 40% live in Israel, and the other 20% are in Europe and Russia and elsewhere. Even so, even though 40% of the world's Jews are in America, that still only equates to about 1.5% of our population. However, the pro-Israel lobby, most of the Jews in America do support Israel to some extent or another, although that is weakening, as I said last episode. And that support ranges from total devotion to where Israel's first, last, and always, to kind of this feeling that they're supposed to support Israel. It's a huge spectrum, actually, of support. But in the pro-Israel lobby in the U.S., this tiny, tiny percentage of the population is massively overrepresented in our government. It's also massively overrepresented in our media as well. You can come in anytime, honey. It's also massively overrepresented money-wise. And the pro-Israel lobby here has become really, it's considered the most powerful lobby in American politics since the neocons took over our country with the George W. Bush administration, and after and helped along by the convenient 9/11 event. You have a very tiny sliver of the population that has virtual control over U.S. foreign policy. And I'll go into much more detail next week. There was a great study recently done, and I'll get the fellow's name for you, but he was looking through all the contributions, pro-Israel contributions by organizations and by individual donors, and he actually identified that a huge portion of it comes from just a handful of individual donors. And many of us know these names, like Sheldon Adelson, for example, and others. But literally, it's a tiny group of people that through bribes and, they call them election contributions, have virtually taken over foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, for the United States of America. Hi, Sid.
Hello.
I'm still rambling Rose here. One thing that's, I think, very important for Americans to understand is that while the U.S. Congress, our elected representatives can hold dual citizenship, and many of them hold dual citizenship with Israel, in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, that is completely illegal. And so, so Israel, it's okay to have dual Israeli U.S. citizenship and be a senator or a representative, but it is absolutely not okay and not allowed in Israel for their lawmakers to hold dual citizenship. And we'll go more into those kind of issues next week. I hope I made some sense.
Hello.
Hi, honey.
My job, there's this old theological question. Could God build a rock so big that he couldn't lift it. And my job is, could my wife dig herself a hole so deep she couldn't climb out of it? Well, I want to introduce you to Napoleon. Is this going to work? Napoleon is our three-legged cat. So say hi. 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 And, but when Napoleon and Little Dog get fighting and playing, man, that right hook, Napoleon still has it. Still has it.
They don't fight. They always play.
It's always play. It's always play. Well, this morning, I was saying, Jan, what is the feature presentation for tonight? And we got talking a little bit, and I said, you know, what is real? Give me something real Syrian. So I spent a couple of weeks in Uganda, and you would be in a room and be in a meeting and talking, and finally you're getting to the point of the meeting, and someone would come in the room, and everything would come to a stop, and that person would be introduced to every single person in the room. Long, unhurried. Okay, good. Then you get back, and just before the ball got rolling again, somebody else would come in the room. And greetings and greetings and greetings. Well, one of our early friends from that part of the world, from Pakistan, and the phone would ring, and it's our friend. Hello, how are you? Oh, good, thank you. How's sister? Sister's doing well. And how are the boys? Oh, the boys are doing well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Did you sleep well? Yes, I slept well. You know, that, you know, literally in Uganda, it would be, have you had rice today? Have you eaten? Did you sleep? Yeah, on and on. So this morning, I said, what? Give me something in Syrian culture. You know, what do you remember? And Jan goes, it's the goodbyes.
Yes.
And tell me when we have 5 minutes left, because we can start our goodbyes.
We can start those now, actually. I think we're in good shape time-wise. Yep.
Well, hold on. Little Dog remembered last time so well. He wants to sing one more song.
It's good to lighten up after what we've been talking about.
You're not going to sing for Yay? Come on, sing. Sing. Sing.
Well done, guys.
Oh, he's singing the blues. And it really was the blues, because we went to Lowe's today instead of Home Depot, and at Lowe's, none of the tellers have dog biscuits, because at Home Depot, he knows every single teller that's got dog biscuits. So in signing off.
Yeah, the people in Syria and around the Middle East will know exactly what we're talking about here, because it's a classic situation of how long can you extend out your goodbyes.
We got to go now.
So we're going to say goodnight now.
And I'm going to be saying goodbye. Goodbye.
Oh, goodbye, Habibi. Good night. Have a good night.
I'll have a good night. Will you have a good night? Goodbye.
I'll try to have a good night. A blessing on your house.
A blessing on your house, Habibi.
And I hope that send my greetings to all your friends and family, please, for me.
I will send all the greetings to friends and family. We've got to say goodbye now. So goodbye.
Good night, Habibi.
Good night, Habibi.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, goodbye.
We love you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Oh, can I make you a plate of food? Let me make you a plate of food before you go.
I can't eat anymore. I can't possibly
No, really,
eat anymore.
you can't leave now. I got to make one more plate of food.
We're leaving. Good night. Good night, little dog.
That was good. Thank you for singing. You did a good job. Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure it ended yet. It's not ending.
Are we still there?
There we go.
Oh, goodbye.